So 101 is Silanor. Its generic is doxepin. Its class is tricyclic antidepressant and it's used for insomnia. 102 is Eliquis. Its generic is apixaban. Its class is anticoagulant and it's used to prevent blood clots. 103 is Zovirax. Its generic is acyclovir. Its class is antiviral and it's used for herpes and shingles. 104th is Xanax. Its generic is alprazolam. Its class is benzodiazepine and it's used for anxiety and panic disorder. 105th is Tenormin. Its generic is atenolol. Its class is beta blocker and it's used for hypertension. So 106 is Zocor. Its generic is simvastatin. Its class is statin and it's used for cholesterol. 107th is Avista. Its generic is raloxifene. Its class is selective estrogen receptor modulator and it's used for women after menopause for osteoporosis and invasive breast cancer. 108 is Plaquenil. Its generic is hydroxychloroquine. Its class is immunosuppressant and specially anti-malarial and is used for malaria. 109th is Imdur and its generic is isosorbide mononitrate. Its class is nitrate and it's used for chest pain or angina due to heart condition. 110th is Bentyl. Its generic is dicyclomine. Its class is anticholinergic and it's used for irritable bowel syndrome. So 111th is Singulair. Its generic is montelukast. Its class is leukotriene inhibitor and it's used for asthma. 112th is Ambien. Its generic is zolpidem. Its class is sedative hypnotics and it's used for insomnia or sleep problems. 113th is Flonase. Its generic is fluticasone. Its class is corticosteroid and it's used for sneezing, runny nose, and symptoms of hay fever. 114th is Ketapres. Its generic is clonidine. Its class is central alpha agonist and it's used for hypertension, ADHD, etc. 115th is Lunesta. Its generic is ezobiclone. Its class is sedative hypnotics and it's used for insomnia or sleep problems. So 116th is Pradaxa. Its generic is dabigatran. Its class is anticoagulant and it's used to prevent blood clots. 117th is Restoril. Its generic is temazepam. Its class is benzodiazepine and it's used for insomnia. 118th is Zomig. Its generic is zolmitriptan. Its class is anti-migraine agent and it's used for migraine attacks. 119th is Sinemet. Its generic is levodopa and carbidopa. Its class is central nervous system agents and it's used for symptoms of Parkinson's disease. 120 is Apresolin. Its generic is hydrolizin. Its class is vasodilator and it's used for hypertension. So 121 is Aventil. Its generic is nortriptyline. Its class is tricyclic antidepressant and it's used for depression. 122 is Ritalin. Its generic is methylphenidate. Its class is central nervous system stimulants and it's used for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. 123rd is Haldol. Its generic is haloperidol. Its class is antipsychotic and it's used for schizophrenia. 124th is Doxy. Its generic is doxycycline. Its class is tetracycline antibiotic and it's used for bacterial infections. 125th is Uroxetrol. Its generic is alfuzosin. Its class is alpha blockers and it's used for benign prostatic hyperplasia. So 126th is Keflex. Its generic is cephalexin. Its class is cephalosporin antibiotic and it's used for bacterial infections. 127th is Avodart. Its generic is dutasteride. Its class is 5-alpha reductase inhibitor and it's used for benign prostatic hyperplasia. 128th is Luvox. Its generic is fluvoxamine. Its class is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor and it's used for depression. 129th is Requip. Its generic is ropinirole. Its class is dopamine agonist and it's used for restless leg syndrome. 130 is Tapazole. Its generic is methimazole. Its class is anti-thyroid agent and it's used for overactive thyroid, also known as hyperthyroidism. 131st is Vapro. Its generic is irbesartan. Its class is angiotensin receptor blocker and it's used for hypertension. 132 is Mobic. Its generic is meloxicam. Its class is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug and it's used for arthritis. 133 is Adderall. Its generic is amphetamine and dextroamphetamine. Its class is stimulants and it's used for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. 134th is Imitrex. Its generic is sumatriptan. Its class is selective serotonin receptor agonist and it's used for migraines. 135th is Augmentin. Its generic is amoxicillin and clavulanic acid. Its class is antibiotic and it's used for bacterial infections. So 136 is Paxil. Its generic is paroxetine. Its class is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor and it's used for depression. 137th is Tiazac. Its generic is diltiazem. Its class is calcium channel blocker and it's used for hypertension. 138th is Janumet. Its generic is sitagliptin and metformin. Its class is DPP4 inhibitor and biguanide and it's used for type 2 diabetes. 139th is Prevacol. Its generic is Pravastatin. Its class is statin and it's used for cholesterol. 140 is Adalat XL. Its generic is nifedipine. Its class is calcium channel blocker and it's used for angina and hypertension. So 141st is Inderal. Its generic is propranolol. Its class is beta blocker and it's used for hypertension. 142 is Peridex. Its generic is chlorhexidine. Its class is antimicrobial and it's used for disinfection before surgery and for gingivitis. 143 is Decadron. Its generic is dexamethasone. Its class is corticosteroid and it's used to relieve swelling, redness, and itching. 144th is Celebrex. Its generic is celecoxib. Its class is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug and it's used for pain and inflammation in arthritis. 145 is Bactroben. Its generic is Mupirocin. Its class is topical antibiotic and it's used for skin infections. So 146 is Prozac. Its generic is Fluoxetine. Its class is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor and it's used for depression. 147th is Tricor. Its generic is Fenofibrate. Its class is fibrate and it's used for cholesterol. 148th is Vasotec. Its generic is Enalapril. Its class is ACE inhibitor and it's used for hypertension. 149th is Januvia. Its generic is Sitagliptin. Its class is DPP4 inhibitor and it's used for type 2 diabetes. 150 is Strattera. Its generic is Atomoxetine. Its class is selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor and it's used for ADHD. Thanks for watching and see you next time.